Hi, everyone, and welcome to our inaugural video webinar where we're hoping to share experiences with members of our learning and development community having to do with how we're all navigating through this unforeseen and unprecedented crisis that we're all living through. And for the first time, we thought it would be great to bring together members of our community to share experiences, lessons learned, what has worked, what hasn't, how we've changed, and what we've had to do. My name is Rita McGrath. I'm a longtime faculty member here at Columbia Business School, and I'm delighted to be stepping in as your moderator today. So to set the scene, I thought it would be interesting to just let you know. So this recording, the webinar will be recorded. We will welcome your enthusiastic participation on social media. Our hashtag is #CBSExecEd. And if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We'll be monitoring that. If we have more questions than we can get to in the context of today's conversation, please know we'll capture them and get back to you afterwards with some responses. So don't think this is our only chance. We'll come back to you with those. So we'd appreciate your giving questions. We've allowed a chunk of time for your thoughts and input, and we'd love to have you participate with us. So let me introduce the concept behind this whole idea, which is something I talk and write about a lot, and which we feature in many of our courses here at Columbia, which is this notion of navigating through strategic inflection points. And a strategic inflection point is something that occurs typically in the external environment that exerts a 10x force pressure on your business. In other words, it changes something about the way your business operates. And for all of us where, our business is being in a classroom or being in a conference or being in a setting, bringing people together, thinking about where people should relate to each other, this COVID inflection point has thrown every one of those assumptions into disarray. And so we thought, 9 months in, it's probably a great opportunity to stop and reflect. In some ways, it's taken our business to new heights. In some ways, it's caused older practices to fall by the wayside. And so we're here to hear from colleagues and peers about how this is going to work. So I'll briefly introduce the panel, and then I'll turn it over to each of them to introduce themselves. So we have Mila Gill, who is the Director of Professional and Attorney Development at Weil Gotshal, one of the leading law firms in New York. And Mila and I have worked together on a major program for onboarding for their young attorneys, which she'll talk to you about when we turn the stage over to her. And we have Jeff Pickerman, who's a panelist with the Director of Talent Analytics and Behavior Change at Aetna. So a healthcare company right in the middle of everything. And Jeff is actually more of the representing the open enrollment side of the house, where he sent a number of folks to us for leadership development. And then Columbia's own Pierre, who is our Associate Dean for Executive Education, and, wandered into the job or deliberately took into the job, but wasn't nearly anticipating the kind of incredible change that he'd be asked to lead us through. So without further ado, let me turn us over to Mila.
Thank you so much, Rita. Hi, everyone. And I must offer a huge thanks to Columbia Business School for this wonderful opportunity to join this panel today. And thanks to all of you for attending. I'm trying not to be too intimidated by this number count here that I'm seeing on the screen, but I'm so very delighted with the turnout. So again, I'm Mila Gill. I am currently the U.S. Director of Professional Development and Attorney Training at Weil Gotshal Manges, an international law firm with 15 offices around the globe. I'm based in New York, where actually I have remained throughout the entire pandemic and work from home period. Of course, home and office are now combined here in what real estate agents euphemistically call a cozy Manhattan apartment, but I'm making do. It's certainly been interesting, and I do consider myself extremely blessed that I have remained healthy and have been able to continue doing the work that I love to do over the past year. So very blessed. Just a bit more on my background. I myself am a Columbia alum. I graduated from Columbia Law School and then practiced as an attorney for several years. I definitely learned a lot from that time, and that experience informs the work that I do now with attorneys. But I found my true professional passion when I switched to the talent management side of the house. So I subsequently held roles at Kirkland & Ellis and Latham & Watkins, two other large international law firms. before joining my current firm about 2.5 years ago, where I now focus on training and development for the firm's attorneys, though I also work on wellness initiatives for all personnel here. So again, hello, and I'm thrilled to be here with you all. And now over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Mila, and thanks all for inviting me to be here today. Again, also really excited to be here and kind of share about what's been going on over the last year with our organization and just more broadly in our field. So my name is Jeff. I head talent cultures for Aetna and CVS Health, our analytics and behavior change organization. So it's our data scientists, our data engineers, and all of our analytics folks in the two combined organizations. By training, I'm an organizational psychologist. What gets me really excited, or what I find kind of thinking about like my mission or my purpose in life, is kind of helping people feel valued in their role, both personally and professionally. So really looking at that human experience of work. And I have some really fun stuff. We're going to talk about what we've done over the last year, over this crazy year we've had. But I want to be thoughtful about time, and I'm going to pass it over to Pierre to introduce himself.
Great. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you all for tuning in to this event. My name is Pierre Yard. I'm the Faculty Vice Dean for Executive Education, and I oversee all aspects of our executive education operations. I've been in this role since January of 2020, and it's been very interesting. And prior to this, I've been on the faculty at Columbia since 2007. I'm an economist by training, and my research and teaching is in the field of macroeconomics. I'm delighted to be here with you all and look forward to the conversation.
So let's start with Mila. As I mentioned, one of your responsibilities is developing this major attorney onboarding program, which might be a little unusual for some of our listeners because law firms do this differently than many other firms too, because you have actually cohorts that you bring on. And in this year, you couldn't be in person to do it, which you normally would have. So talk a little bit about how you changed that, how you made it adapt.
Yeah, absolutely. It was certainly a big change this time around. So just briefly on what we do historically, as you mentioned, we kind of hire in cohorts every year. Law schools graduate a class, and then firms, take from that class to form their first year attorney class. So what we typically do is when our new attorney class starts, they all start on the same day in the US. And so Weil brings everybody together in New York, flies them all in for a very robust onboarding and orientation program. So this involves, several days of different types of substantive sessions about the law, about how the firm works, as well as social events in the evening. In the fall of 2019, which was the last onboarding program before the pandemic hit, our orientation actually spanned an entire week. It was 3 days of the firm's own programming, and then for the first time ever, 2 full days with Columbia Business School, which was a great success. And so, the idea behind the partnership with Columbia is that in addition to being great technical practitioners, it is so important that our attorneys have business acumen and financial literacy. And so who better to start them down that path than, the renowned faculty of Columbia Business School. So this time around, we obviously had to rethink things when we onboarded our new attorneys. Obviously, travel was out, even though we really have this desire for all of our new attorneys across offices to meet each other. Now, perhaps surprisingly, we did keep the orientation program for an entire week, and it was basically full days every day. And I say surprisingly because I recently attended a meeting of law firm PD professionals, and many of the folks there were saying things like, oh, of course you can't do all day sessions now. Nobody has the appetite, the endurance for that, and so on. But nevertheless, when the Weil attorneys and staff who were involved in planning our program really sat down and focused on what we should do, we did decide to keep, the general time format of a week-long program with full days. First of all, many folks pointed out that this is what working is these days, which is hours and hours, almost nonstop in front of the screen. So given that this is the new normal, sort of the onboarding process, it's okay to reflect that. On top of that, we frankly just felt very confident about our content feeling either that it was, very compelling and engaging, or maybe in some cases where perhaps less so, perhaps the material is a bit drier, at least it was still necessary information for the attorneys to hear at the outset. However, in consideration of our changed circumstances, we did make some adjustment. We looked very carefully at the content and format within that overall structure and reevaluated things in light of the program being fully virtual this year. So here are some examples of how we approached this year's orientation a bit differently than in the past. Just from a logistics point of view, we pared down the length of many of the individual sessions, and we're very mindful of providing sufficient breaks throughout. We did ask ourselves for many of the sessions whether it was important for new attorneys to receive that particular training at the outset. Admittedly, we kind of front load the information sharing because it's easier to get at these attorneys before they actually start their client work. So, instead of focusing on the convenience factor, we focused on, okay, what do they really need to know to start their jobs? We also looked at whether there were offerings that were, perhaps better presented later, something that could wait, or perhaps would even be a richer offering with at least a little bit of additional work context. Again, this resulted in not so much cutting down the overall length of the program, it was still 1 week, but made the days a bit shorter. And even more importantly, it provided us with the opportunity to provide new sessions that were now more relevant in light of the pandemic. And I'll get to that a bit more in a minute. At the highest levels, there was a big push for this program to create as much opportunity for integration of the new attorneys and interaction with each other and current personnel. And this has been a major priority generally in light of the pandemic. We have multiple committees and task forces dedicated to this review. And it was expected that our onboarding program would be a reflection of these new urgent priorities. So therefore, when we looked at, program ideas, there's a department that typically does 3 panel presentations. We reduced that to 2 panel presentations and then 1 hour of fully interactive exchange. And the Columbia program, I'm pleased to say, though it's our longest sessions, they are also very, very highly interactive hours. Content-wise, we also made adjustments. Throughout the week, we referenced the new work from home lifestyle, but we added a standalone hour-long presentation that discussed with attorneys, how do you start a career and build your brand as a new attorney, while working from your couch or in your living room? That's something that we've never done before. Branding has always been important, how to start your career off on the right foot, but again, very different when it's on a screen. Things like professionalism and what does making a good impression mean these days? What does responsiveness mean? Also, content-wise, we added wellness programming this year. So the theme of self-care has certainly come up in the past as part of various presentations, but this year we really kind of ramped things up. We had a formal session by the chair of our new wellness committee that specifically discussed the efforts and goals and programs of that committee. It was very well received. Attendees even wanted more time there. We also held various mini wellness sessions, things like ergonomics and stretch and meditation, in the hopes that our new attorneys would kind of have their interest piqued and think about incorporating these kind of practices into their everyday routine. And frankly, it also just reaffirmed, the firm's commitment in the area of wellness. And finally, and though there was some trepidation about this, we also did not shy away from the social events. We held 2 online parties, if you will. One was a mentoring mixer over the Zoom platform, and one was a really fun and very well-received social event over a great platform called Remo. I'm happy to talk more about those later in the Q&A if people want more information. But both of these were absolute hits. In spite of Zoom fatigue and long days in orientation, our current and new attorneys absolutely loved it. In the planning phase, some of our committee members were nervous about the awkwardness of it. They thought, oh my gosh, here we're going to start and it's going to be awkward. And it's certainly understandable. But I think, one of the many turning points in the discussion came when people pointed out, this is how we get to know people now. This is how attorneys are getting to know new clients. This is how relationships will be forged. So it's really important that attorneys develop this skill from the outset. And we also made the decision not to have social events focus around activity sessions like, cooking or a comedy show. We really wanted the attorneys to kind of look each other in the eye and get to know each other. I'm pleased to say again that both of those went well. In fact, we got a lot of feedback on our Remo event saying that it should have been longer, and it was already an hour and 15 minutes. And a lot of feedback saying, oh, it would have been longer would have been better, which you don't hear often these days when it comes to screen time. And so I'll also note that the rating for the overall week, the program overall was very high. We were kind of surprised by this. We don't know if it was the sympathy factor or if our new attorneys just genuinely enjoyed this new format better. So that what my takeaway from that was that, far from just making do in this era, I think there are real possibilities here. If the old normal should become permanently out of reach, whether because of long-term limitations or due to this inflection point that Rita's speaking of, I think there's a lot we can do and we really can thrive in new formats.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I would observe and that we found at Columbia and I found in other sessions that I do is the screen format is surprisingly intimate. That like if you were a young attorney being onboarded, the fact that you could be literally 18 inches away from a super senior partner at the firm, that's new. That's not something you would have necessarily been able to do in the crowded sort of hubbub of an in-person event. So Jeff, let's turn to you. So you're in a healthcare
Absolutely.
Company. You've clearly had your company is at the epicenter. You're at the epicenter of the people in the company. What have been some of the things you've worked your way through as you've grappled with this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a year to work in healthcare. I will say, I've been really proud of the work that both Aetna and CVS have done to help not only us as employees, but also just kind of the, society and the United States kind of address this, it was a year and we're still kind of making progress towards that. So a little bit of context around kind of what my organization does. We're seeking to really embed our analytics and all of the key decisions across the organization through the lens of helping us harness all of the data that we have out there to become the most human-centric healthcare company, to really help people lead healthier, happier lives. And so that's what drew me to the organization was that wellness is really important to me. I'm kind of like a crunchy Northern California guy deep down in my heart. So just thinking about, I've always been really excited about that idea of not just helping the organizations make money, but that making people really feel valued and kind of understood at the human experiences that they have at work. That creates the engagement and the kind of the drive to go and above and beyond for the organization. So if we kind of take a step back and think about this last year where, so my personal experience, we were lucky enough to have a daughter last February. So right before, I'll never forget being in the hospital with my wife recovering, and way down on the New York Times homepage was this little article about the coronavirus. It was just way down there. It was not a thing yet. And then now I come back from my paternity leave, and then everything starts to change, and we start to see people, the impact that it was having on people with caregiver status, whether it's children or parents or wherever it might be. And now all of a sudden we're seeing managers need to have very different conversations with their teams than they used to have. So if we're thinking about, at CVS, we always talk about the what and the how of our work. So kind of like what we do, the specific impact that we create, but how we do it. So our performance conversations are always through those lens. So I thought it would be helpful to use that foundation to talk about this last year. So, what we trained people on started to change. My job, I'm lucky that I get to set kind of the strategic people direction for our organization. I get to say not only what training topics, but here's how we're going to manage performance. Here's how we're going to give feedback. Here's how we're going to develop. I really get to look at all of those levers, which has always been what really excites me. And so we were looking at, we were onboarding a bunch of new people. And again, I love that starting your career from your couch. Mila, I'm going to steal that. I hope that's all right. I hope we can still be friends there. But again, we're now having managers come to us and say like, Jeff, I feel like some of our folks are having a rough time and I don't know how to have that conversation. And, traditionally in the past, there were some conversations, that I think a lot of us grew up sort of in the mindset that you leave some of that stuff at the door when you come to work, and you come to work and you're here to do work and we're here to be. And of course, we do need to keep showing up and doing our work, but we found that, our folks were just having very different experiences. So we started to introduce new kind of wellness conversation training and just thinking about, what would, the idea of like, what does success for my team look like last year? And it was very much, the focus shifted away from let's, make our people better data scientists. Let's ensure that we're building these great stakeholder relationships, which are still really important. But it's also, let's make sure somebody feels comfortable going to their manager and say, hey, I'm having a hard time. Like I'm having a hard time focusing. This is really distracting. I'm sure a lot of us experienced, everybody had a very different kind of approach to last year. Some people were kind of okay and they could keep their head down and keep going, and others, it was really hard. And just, for everyone on the call, if you're still having a hard time, that's absolutely okay. I had a rough year. It was hard. We have 2 kids, and, balancing work and life. And, so the what of what we trained on, we added new skills. We broke down, things, but how we trained people also changed. We absolutely broke down our larger training sessions into smaller, more manageable chunks. We thought very differently about how to kind of create, more engagement, like, my flock, so to speak, they are analytics people, they're data scientists. It's fair to say some of them they're a little more introverted, so to speak. They're not used to kind of like starting conversations and initiating conversations. And yet still, we wanted them to feel connected and a part of. So we were kind of thinking about, let's create these like small breakout rooms and kind of thinking about how do we ensure people are having a great conversation during their training. So again, that was, I think, some of the structural stuff that a lot of you probably maybe did little things like that. But I think another thing that I found helpful, and kind of we're still, me and my team are working with our managers right now to think about what does 2021 look like in terms of training. Because, I think we were joking when we were prepping this group for the call, we were talking about how, the first few months, like let's say last March and April, we were all just like, is this, we kind of were not sure what the future looked like. And then come June, July, we said, it might be a little while like this. Let's start to like assume we're going to be remote. And then now we're like, okay, remote's going to be here for a while. Even when we come back into office, some people kind of got used to this work style and they may stay that way. So the conversations, I'm going to wrap in a moment and pass over to Pierre, but the conversations we're having right now are with our learners and our managers about kind of like, specifically the thing that's missing these days often is those casual conversations with managers and each other kind of in the office. And so what we're seeing is when we send somebody to a training and we want them to then have those conversations with the managers after, kind of what happens before and after training, as many of you know, so important, that long-term behavior change that we want to go for. So we're thinking really differently about how are people getting that opportunity with their manager to really talk about the skills that they learned. Because I guess, my closing point there is that it feels like, now we have so many more meetings now, because what could have been a 5-minute, hey, knock on the office, can I talk to you for a minute, now is a 30-minute meeting. And I think it's, especially our more junior folks are having trouble kind of putting time on their calendar to say like, hey, Pierre, I want to talk about what I learned. Can you give me can we talk about this development goal? Like it's project. I mean, we had a busy year. We had a great year, really a year to be very proud of, but we worked really hard. And so the extracurriculars were missing. So that's what we're looking at for this next year, how to really make sure that continues to happen. And, some great opportunities to, again, leverage the Columbia open enrollment programs to do that as well. Our folks have, we have some really picky folks, I'll be honest, between the 360 of us, and the feedback from y'all these Columbia programs has been really, really fantastic. So really excited to see your questions, and also, really happy to find me on LinkedIn moving forward. Always happy to help and have a conversation. So
Jeff, one of the things that I think has become an issue for many firms as we're moving through this virtual is the whole notion of psychological safety. And how do you make it okay for people to bring up, my kid has the measles and I've been up all night, and, I know it's the quarterly review meeting, but I just am not able to be there mentally here today. How do you make that, because I think there's this fine line, right? You want to be psychologically safe. You want to let people be themselves and raise issues. At the same time, you need accountability. I mean, we all have responsibilities to our coworkers and our colleagues. Was there anything specific that you did to really hone in on that?
That's a great question. Yeah, psychological safety is Huge, been a huge topic, and I really, you make a great point about that fine line between, maintaining accountability. I think for me, for our organization, I think there was a few things we did, with our leadership team. We asked, they were just really open about things that they're doing for not only psychological safety, but just their wellness. Just like, listen, we had, the, SVP of our organization on one of our, team, meetings or one of our town halls. He was like, every day I go out with my kids and I make sure we take a walk. And I do that. You should do those little things of just like, me specifically, what I did, because I kind of lead a lot of our people work, I let the organization know, like I was really open and transparent with a lot of people that it was like, my schedule is different these days. After 4, I've always, my emails where I was like, I turn into a dad at 4 o'clock. So kind of making it really okay to say, hey, here are the boundaries that I have right now. Here are the things that I need to do for myself. And it's that it, and also kind of really through the lens of to me, this is what I do to ensure that I can show up from, 7 to 4 each day, that these are the ways. So kind of talking not only about, hey, here's how to set a boundary, but I have found that setting these boundaries and having that balance in my life now has enabled me to have a really successful year and to kind of really be present when I'm there.
Yeah, I think that's super important, the leading by example and, leaders being willing to be open about that. So Pierre, you and I have had a fantastic year together, beginning with, you come into January and you've got an entire plan, right? Everything's set, everything's organized. And, most of our in-person programs were organized months in advance. And then, so perhaps walk us through how you responded and how your team responded.
Yeah, so I came in, I met everybody, I was onboarded, and then we experienced this crisis. And to be honest, a crisis is always an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us, it's an opportunity for our clients. Now, naturally, as you mentioned, the product that we provide, we couldn't provide it anymore. The bulk of what we do is in-person learning, though we do have an online portfolio. And for our clients, even though we couldn't deliver in-person learning, it was clear that our clients themselves needed us in some ways more than ever, because a crisis is a time when you need to think strategically, when mid-level managers have larger shoes to fill, they need to climb up the learning curve fast. So we needed to come up with a solution. And naturally, online learning has a lot of advantages to resolving some of those problems. So what we did, we made a strategic decision relatively early on to focus our energies entirely on different modalities of online learning. So we've essentially creatively converted everything that we do into a virtual format, into a live virtual format. And let me mention just a few things that we discovered along the way about the virtual format. It actually has some advantages relative to in-person learning. And those advantages go beyond being able to just learn on your sofa. There's more than that. It actually allows us to bring in speakers from all over the world, including many that we would not be able to get normally. It allows students to have more self-pacing. What that means is that you can give time for the information to digest. You can provide time for our participants to apply the skills that they're learning in the classroom in their actual jobs. And the other thing, which is something that you mentioned, Rita, is that actually participation in many ways is much more inclusive online, because we all see each other. And as a faculty member who has been where I've actually led some sessions, I've realized that I hear from a broader scope of people in teaching online relative to in person, where it's more likely that one person can potentially monopolize the conversation. Let me mention just a few other things that we've done. Our topics have been adjusted. We're focusing much more on today's challenges, and I'm just going to mention a few, but there are many more. We have a new distressed real estate investing class. We have an advanced value investing class. Our leadership classes focus on a lot of the topics that apply today, such as how to manage a remote workforce, some of the topics that Jeff was mentioning. And our formatting is much more flexible. We have shorter sessions. For example, Rita, you're leading a session on I believe on Thursday, which is a short session, which is related to our Women in Leadership program. And finally, I want to mention that, as Mila mentioned, the networking is always complicated in a in a virtual format, and that's an important part of our in-person learning experience. And what we've done is follow a lot of creative initiatives brought on by many of our members here of executive education to basically think about what to do in our breakouts, have goals, have strategic goals, have pre-assigned discussion topics. And we also have been making use of some of the new novel platforms to facilitate networking. I'll just close by mentioning an additional point, which is related to some of the questions I've seen in the chat. I anticipate that this new business line of live virtual formatting that we are doing is going to be here to stay for the long term, because it is best suited for some of our clients. And we've received some very good feedback from many of our participants. And in addition, research does find that information retention and comprehension doesn't suffer from the virtual learning environment relative to in-person. So I think that this crisis has also taught us that there is a new opportunity, and we are doing what we can to seize that opportunity.
Absolutely. A couple of other things I'd mention, and then I'd like to turn to the panel to talk about how your agendas have shifted since the pandemic. So I'll just give an example. The short executive access program that I'm running came out of, so we run a course called Women in Leadership, which when it's run in person, it runs 3 days. It's like drinking from a fire hose. And so we've shortened the days, stretched them out over a month, and the responses have been just amazing. And now what we're finding is the participants are actually keeping in touch with each other. One just had a baby, which is nice, and they shared it all with each other. So that was great. But much more networking and bonding than I've seen even in the in-person class, because it's just so much less friction. The short course I'm doing, and it's actually Wednesday, is on the theme of, so you want to be a sponsor, you want to be more inclusive, where do you even start? And what's neat about this format is you can tackle a topic like that. It's 3 hours, there's only so much you're going to get done. But if you're just looking for what are like 3 things I can do that would help me get started on this journey of sponsorship, and we can do that in a lot of our executive access programming, which I'm super excited about. So let's talk about, this time last year, you had an agenda, right? There were things you were working on and plans for the year. As you were saying, Jeff, you were expecting a baby. How has that changed? Like what's kind of fallen off the truck, and what has now attained additional urgency?
Yeah, I can start there. So I think, I hit on this a little bit, but I'll kind of reemphasize and/or hit the points again. Some of the training, we're thinking about this next year, the wellness piece, especially like the work-life balance, and really not just work-life balance has been, it's been a buzzword. Like we've talked about it a lot, but it's very different now. And you'll see there's not a hard stop for some people. I have a hard stop by my necessity because my wife needs help. That's just the deal. But I think for us, when we think about a lot of the stuff is still going to be there. It's just going to be virtual. We have our business essentials course that me and my team built, which is just like the basic fundamental, like new to professional life. Here's what you need to learn. It's virtual. It's spread out, just like what Rita said. Instead of like the fire hose version, it's a little bit of a slow drip. But we're still building our leaders with you all. We have some of our other internal programs that we're doing. But I think this year, the big difference is going to be not just kind of training people on what work-life balance means, but again, really ensuring that they feel comfortable having the conversation, saying, here's what I need to stay healthy, both, physically, but also kind of emotionally.
Well, and I think the whole mental health issue has become much more important, but also much more discussed. I think people have been really encouraged now. It used to be really hidden and shameful. And if you were just having a terrible day, people would never bring that to work. And now I think people are just much more tolerant and much more open to that. So keeping people engaged, right? If we're all together physically, it's really easy. I have a wonderful friend who works for a sort of a venturing group. And she said, we're all working together and you kind of know what's going on because you're together. She says, now everything's a meeting. Right? And I think, you mentioned the junior people having to sort of do that proactive outreach and keep people there. But how do you keep people, involved and engaged when you can't keep them together physically? Mila, I don't know if you want to tackle that one.
Yeah, happy to. You know, it can be done. I think you just have to do it a little differently. There is no water cooler talk. There's no running into people in the cafeterias and so on. I think certainly the big events are one way to go, but those can be time consuming. Those can be a real commitment. I really encourage people to think about building in short bursts of interaction into their day. I know. For my team, I had engaged in an exercise with one of our team members that the point really had been to kind of build leadership and communication skills. So the assignment was to gather the team together every day for 15 minutes. But what the byproduct of that is it's been an incredibly bonding experience, both just in terms of personally catching up, but also finding out what everybody's doing professionally. There are things that we work on together, but then there are things that, team members are just doing completely separately. That is important for us to know, that there may not have been an actual forum for that. It's not like you would call a meeting to necessarily talk about something you have nothing to do with, So that's been very educational. I know other teams have attorney and so on have approaches where they say, okay, every day at 3:00, there's going to be a Zoom, join or not if you can that day, but anyone who's around, let's have a chat, right? So keeping it short, but keeping it regular, I think that can help a lot. There was a study I came across a while back saying that really deep work bonds can be formed by regular interactions that, even though they're short in nature, if they're marked with a positivity and kindness, the bonds can still develop. You don't need to have this, amazing thing in common or some work project. It's just that frequency of interaction and over time can really pay dividends in terms of cementing that relationship. You can also look for common interests. I think if you're folding in these new efforts to stay connected with interests that you already have, whether it's a book club or Peloton was huge at our firm. A lot of people joined a Peloton group that was headed by a senior partner. Then you don't really feel like, oh, it's one more thing I have to do. You're doing something that you already enjoy doing, but now you're doing it with your colleagues. And then I think you should also, build in opportunities to chat into the work. So I just read an exit interview on Friday where the person had said, really commended our formal and informal mentoring programs here at the firm, but said that the best mentoring of all takes place when you're working on a team. And so, that being the case, why not add in 10 minutes at the beginning for a catch up before diving into to the work of the day? And then finally, I encourage people to think of training itself as a connection mechanism. We've had some workshops where, typically I'm focused on the acquisition of skills and the conveying of information. But when we use things like breakout rooms, like which Pierre referred to and so on, what I'm finding is that people love the opportunity to talk with their colleagues that they don't see every day. Maybe it's colleagues that are not on a particular project and they get to just see them and speak to them. And the feedback, they'll actually comment on that as being a positive aspect of the training. Finally, just being able to see people, I know for our wellness sessions, someone commented that they logged in to watch it. They ended up enjoying the content, but they logged in because the co-host was a partner and they hadn't seen that partner in a long time. And they really were looking forward to just seeing them again, just, seeing their face. So I think there's a lot of things you can do to build it into culture.
I think that's great. And that was actually a question that Jane had asked. So you actually answered that question. So a question for Pierre from Monica, which is, are there different formats that people really are hungry for in a work from home kind of context?
Absolutely. There's a lot of different ways you can learn online. I mean, traditionally, online has been more asynchronous. And by asynchronous, I don't mean click play and watch the video. I just mean it's mostly video with some webinars and some assignments. But so that's one way you can learn. I'd say that that's traditionally what's happened. But what we do now and what we've introduced is doing it live. And what doing it live does is it allows for much more interactivity. And I saw some questions in the chat about being able to debate and being able to do things organically in a virtual format. And what I would say is that our faculty have become much more well-versed in facilitating these types of discussions in the virtual format. I mean, I do it myself and I teach myself. And the way you could do that is basically having debates in the programs, having cold calling on people, asking them what they think. And in this regard, what I mentioned earlier about inclusivity, that cold calling and having everybody on their toes actually in some ways makes it harder for people to zone out than if they were there live in the classroom. But that's up to the instructor to get right. And I would say that our instructors are all, working very hard to get that right. So there's basically live, there's asynchronous, and also I would say, depending on your goals, you can kind of do something where you send specific individuals into programs, into our open program. So we have open online programs, but then you can also, we're happy to work with your company more directly to address the exact needs of the company to develop a more customized program. And we can also develop a hybrid of these two approaches depending on the needs of the company. So
yeah, I was going to mention that, Pierre, because one of the things that was an innovation we tried with women in leadership was we've actually had a significant number of participants from a single organization and its affiliates. And what that does is it gives you the benefit of the exposure to lots of other organizations and people that aren't around you all the time. But it also allows you to carve out a piece of that programming that's specific and customized to your own needs. So in a way, virtual has made that so much easier because you don't get this sort of in the classroom overwhelming sense of, oh my God, half these people are from this one company.
Absolutely. May I just jump in one more thing, Rita? I think the other thing to note is that you kind of have a choice as to whether you think it's better to learn in an intensive full day week, which can be appropriate in some cases, or to learn over a longer span of time in short bursts. And I think that depends ultimately on who is enrolling, what their goals are, how busy they are, and so on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love the fact that it's given us that much more flexibility. So one of the most difficult, I think, challenges for learning and development people, like in general, is how do we hone in on talent? How do we do talent reviews? How do we decide about promotion? And Mila, you and I've talked about this with respect to the career prospects for young people, when increasingly we're dealing with two things, a tour of duty environment where people don't assume they're going to be with one organization for the bulk of their career, or even in one function, or even with one specialization for their whole careers. There's much more fluidity now. And then the second thing I would say has become increasingly on the agenda of at least the talent people that I talk to is this confusion we often have between confidence and competence. That, historically, many of our career structures have favored very confident people because they, project that they're great and everything. And we've been less attuned sometimes to people that are very competent, but just not great at self-promoting or whatever. And so I'd be very interested in, our readers are interested in, how do you think about talent reviews now? And then how do you, when you don't have the usual markers of competence or confidence around physically, how do you get at that as you're thinking about who gets promoted? Because you can't just put everything on ice till after the pandemic. You have to fill roles and promote people and guide people along in their next career step.
Yep. So this one's for me, Rita?
Sure.
Okay. Well, you raise excellent points. And it's so interesting because I was laughing when Jeff said that perhaps many of the people at his company are introverts. You'd be surprised, even at a law firm, for every person who went to law school because they loved the idea of, these flourishing performances at trial, there are people who went because they really just wanted to kind of wrestle with ideas and have an intellectual approach to what they do. And so, increasingly, even before the pandemic, this idea of presence was really starting to take hold. And I brought in a speaker who focused on executive presence and communication. The firm hadn't typically focused in that area. We had a speaker as part of our Columbia business training, and then we also had another speaker later on in the year. And this is so important because the way we kind of explained it to our attorneys about why this type of program is important, in addition to all the substantive legal training we do, is that you can be an outstanding practitioner. You can know the nuances of your area of law inside out. If you cannot effectively communicate, your points at meetings, it won't matter. If you don't get internal buy-in, if you can't get your team behind you, if you can't get a senior partner to see your position, if you cannot, most importantly, get a client to have confidence in you, a lot of that is going to be for nothing. There's only so far you can go, sort of being a backroom practitioner. And, again, as I said, we have the gamut. We have people who went to law school because they relished the idea of speaking, and then others who are just extremely uncomfortable with it. Now, the trick is, what do you do now? So we had just gotten there in person, and now what does it mean to have executive presence over Zoom? So that is, I can't say we're there yet, but certainly that's something that we're going to have to explore. I think technically, we're not that, it seems like forever, we're not that far in the pandemic where we're yet able to assess, how the laws have changed. Certainly the pandemic will give rise to new laws and so on. But I think the law is still essentially the same, but it's how you go about the practice of law that has now changed. Not to get too technical, because I know not everyone here is at a law firm, but, obviously at a big law firm, you take a lot of depositions, and that's done according to very strict, procedural steps and protocols. And now, depositions had to be taken remotely. So it's how quickly can you adjust to the new way of doing things? I think that, I love the point earlier about how, with new opportunities, there's more inclusiveness. So I would, submit that in person, the extroverted model, and dare I say it, perhaps even the model that favors, straight white men, that could be perhaps chipped away at on the virtual platform. There might be room for other types of styles and personalities to be more effective. And I think that's certainly a positive development. And I would love to see that reflected in the various ways which we assess people,
Interesting. And Jeff?
Yeah. So, great topic and question. I think, yes, it is. You're right. Like, we've been remote now for, going on a year, and we still have people growing and driving in their role, and we're still promoting people. I was lucky enough to get a chance. So a little more context about my role. We work in this huge organization, but our organization is only about 5 or 6 years old. And when I joined in 2017, we were at 200 folks, and now we're at 700, or going to be out, I think, 900 at the end of this year, kind of analytics folks. So 3x growth in 3 years. And we're kind of a startup in that I've got to create our performance domains and our promotion process. So I've got to essentially build from the ground up the language and the definitions by career step that we use to measure people. And the process that we found really helpful to kind of suss out, well, is this person just really good at self-promotion versus is this person really ready? Like, does it merit that? Is, we have a, biannual, we get our leaders together, and we kind of we built just kind of a form and a process to say, hey, give us this information about the performance, and let's have that conversation. And what we found is a way to kind of get around that is really honestly an opening with our managers and leaders, having conversations about what exactly is this person's impact, and what is this next, what's the platform, the next role for, because we do have a lot, our impact is created by working with our business partners within Aetna and CVS to kind of understand their needs. And so there's a lot of people that need to have that consulting polish. And so there's a lot of folks like me from the BCGs and McKinseys of the world. And then there's these people that just love to code and they love math. And we need to work with them to kind of tone down the statistics talk and talk to the business partners perhaps, but there's still a wonderful, wonderful career path for them in our organization. And so it's just it's really just the transparency about really honest and open about, can the individual have a good conversation about, hey, what's their path forward? Kind of what are the opportunities? What do I need to show? And can we as a leadership team really, I think what impresses me about our senior leadership team and our organization is they're really open about hey, this person, what do you think about them? Is this, are they on that path? So it's kind of I guess what I would close with here is that, some places you can go very far by being really confident and really, really pushy. I think it's incumbent upon the leaders and all of us to make sure we're checking each other in that, because it's, there's a downside to that.
Absolutely.
Great question.
There's a wonderful book by Gary Ridge, the CEO of WD-40, and the subtitle is "Don't Grade My Paper, Help Me Get an A." And it talks about
like
sort of
that.
flipping the whole notion of, you do a year, we evaluate your performance, you made it or you didn't, into instead, well, let's define what getting an A means at the beginning of the year, and then let's work with you throughout that year to see if we can make that that happen. One of the things I think that is new in the whole area of performance evaluation is, speaking of data, if it's all done on Zoom, you have metrics for everything, conceivably. I think the trickier hurdle that we're going to cross is when some people are in the office and some people aren't. And that's going to be a whole nother thing, perhaps for next year's conversation. We have a question from Stav about motivation. How do you get people motivated when, like it's just Groundhog Day every day, right? Like you have the same sort of experiences all day long. How do you get people to have that extra burst of motivation? Any thoughts on that?
So I can share just a couple. It's a great point, and we're in some ways my organization is blessed in that we are working on some really important stuff, but still the Groundhog's Day, it starts to get people down. And I think not to sound kind of too corny about it, but the opportunity to understand like what really matters to these individuals, and kind of like, again, I'm blessed to be able to have a lot of individual conversations within, because it's around 700 people that are my flock. So I know a lot of them, and I can talk to them about what really excites them and encourage them to have a conversation about that. And you can get into a much larger organization that could be hard, but I found, I don't know, there's just, I think the idea of we're in this situation where so many people are having such a hard time, kind of personally, I find a lot of fulfillment in serving people, in helping people. So it's kind of like tapping into that. I found, at least with my direct reports, kind of ways to really highlight the ways that they are impacting, CVS and of our people. That gets them excited. That's when they say, wow, I'm really energized. I don't know, Mila, Pierre, what do you all think?
It's a great topic, great question. We actually had a former practicing attorney turned psychotherapist come in and for 1 hour deliver a session on staying motivated. That was the topic. So we obviously recognize it as important. We're lucky in some respects. Our population is highly, highly motivated. Another thing that helps is their work is quantifiable. You all know that attorneys bill their time in 6 minutes, so we can see how hard you're working. The pressures of the type of work that we do, I think, really keep people engaged. In fact, last year, our firm was extremely productive. That said, that's not to say internally people are not wrestling with certain emotions, being at home, having to deal with online schooling, not having the commute. One of the tips that the therapist gave is the commute did more for you than maybe you realized, even though we all complained about it. So maybe still start the day taking a walk away from, don't just get up and go to your computer. Lots of practical tips like that, I think people can build in and would have a surprising effect on motivation. So encourage people to look into that.
The two cents I would add is I think it's useful in meetings to go in and maybe have a little sense of humor and have some laughter in the meetings. Leave a little time. Hopefully you can't bill for that time, of course, if you're at a law firm. But have a little time for laughter. And I do think that it's important in meetings to not necessarily just go straight through an agenda, but to leave a gap and just say that your expectation is that you're going to hang out. And if people want to bring up things that they're thinking about, that they're not necessarily putting on the agenda, that they do it, because I think sometimes people don't want to put something on the agenda, or there's something lurking in their mind that they maybe would have mentioned to you at the water cooler or in passing, and they are not mentioning it. And that's really the time that you can get that information is in those non-planned moments. And I think it's really important for organizations to try to cultivate those non-planned moments in the over the span of a Zoom-filled day.
I would add one other thing, which is in my own research on how companies miss inflection points and miss big, strong signals, is that the more senior you become, the harder it is to get unfiltered, clear information about what's really going on. And so one best practice I can just add in there is make some time for it, to do those skip level meetings, to have the Zooms where there's not like a packed, got to get this done today agenda. Because, the way that I frame it is snow melts from the edges, and you got to get out to the edges. And it's harder sometimes with Zoom. You can't just drop in on a factory, or whatever. So we're nearly at the moment of wrapping up. I guess I'd invite each of you to offer, if you were chatting to a colleague, what's one thing they might really want to be thinking about, or two things, that they might really want to be thinking about as they build out the rest of 2021. And maybe Jeff, start with you.
Sure. So yeah, when I think about, for this group and for all of us that are, thinking about our employees' experience and kind of the journey in 2021, I would come back to the point that I've hit on a bunch of times where I would say this is a great opportunity to encourage people to have conversations that at work that they haven't had in the past, that I strongly believe, the more we connect with people, like the more authentic we are as human beings and as leaders, the more authentic our people can be. And when people feel authentic at work, I think that's when they feel like that's when you build the engagement, the excitement, and maybe they won't do the tour of duty. Maybe they'll stick with you for a while because I feel like they can really be who they are. So that would be my closing thought here.
Yeah, and I'll be interested to see if companies begin to move towards valuing retention more than perhaps they have over the last 10, 20 years. It'll be interesting to see. Mila?
Okay, so apologies in advance for what might be a bit of a rambling answer. It's a big question, but I would encourage everyone to remain nimble, remain adaptable, even within the work from home period. It's gone through phases. I think as Jeff said at the beginning, we started it thinking, just, let's survive for a couple months. And then it became clear, okay, this is going to be long-term. I think a huge next phase of this, which people have to focus on, is the return to work, because it's not going to be the return to work as we knew it. And, no sooner had we mastered in person and we started to master virtual. Now we're going to have to master hybrid and all sorts of variations. And it's never too soon to be thinking about that. We're very actively thinking about return to work already at Weil, even though we don't know what will happen with the vaccine. One of the things that I've loved about the work from home period is I do think this work from home lifestyle has been a great leveler. It's really leveled the playing field in terms of bringing down hierarchy. It's hard to be that intimidated by a senior person in your organization when their cat runs across the screen, or a kid hits them in the head with a beach ball. I mean, it's just not, it just gives you a new perspective. And so again, even though we're virtual, I think the opportunities to foster community in some ways are stronger than ever before. I know there have been many scenarios where I've felt that. And finally, just to go, because I've seen several people ask in the Q&A about the social platform. We didn't get to discuss it in detail. It's Remo, R-E-M-O. I cannot tell you how delighted grown, men and women and everyone was by the ability to do something social online that did not look like a Zoom box. So feel free to explore that. I highly encourage you to get a customized floor plan as well. You'll see what that is when you explore.
And Pierre?
I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We really appreciate it. I guess my only takeaway, since I am representing Columbia Business School, is that please stay apprised, because we will have a lot more exciting programs that we will be rolling out over the next several months. And we're also looking forward to the pandemic ending and to having you all on our campus soon. And in particular, I want to mention that at the very end of 2021, we will be opening up our brand new campus in Manhattanville, which will be the best looking business school campus in the United States, at least until another school builds one. So we urge you to come visit us if you find yourselves in New York City, or if you live in New York City once that happens. So thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Pierre. Okay, so you will get a follow-up email from us with summary notes, with additional resources, a quick survey about what you'd be interested in us offering. And we really aim to make this more of a conversation and a relationship. For myself, I'd be really interested in knowing if this added value, if hearing from your peers and having an opportunity to have peer dialogue is something that you would appreciate going forward. We suspect it is, but we'd love to get that hypothesis confirmed. And thank you all to our panel. Thank you, Pierre, for making the time. And thanks, folks in the background, for making this all work. Thanks very much. So long.
Thanks all.
Thank you.